So I guess this is kind of interesting year. So you have the census, which then kind of determines how you're going to draw these lines. And I guess this year was a unique year where California actually, I guess, didn't grow as much, or so therefore we lost a couple congressional seats. What kind of difficulty did that create in kind of redrawing everything?
Yeah, so it's funny because if you were to just kind of like ask somebody who's somewhat knowledgeable about it, they'd say, oh yeah, California lost population. California actually grew by 6%, but it lost population relative to the rest of the country, so it grew slower than the rest of the country. And we only lost one congressional district. We probably should have lost two. The only reason we didn't lose two congressional districts is because the state put hundreds of millions of dollars into outreach during the census period to try to get those numbers up, and that ended up meaning that one of the seats that should have gone to Texas ended up coming to us, or one of the seats that should have gone to Florida ended up coming to us. So lose one seat because we grew only 6%. That meant that we lost a seat, so that's a big deal. 52 congressional districts instead of 53. But when you think about it math-wise, 1 out of 50 is 2%. So it means that every congressional district had to grow by 2% to kind of absorb that. Now, that every district has to grow by 2% would be if the whole state grew evenly. But the state didn't grow evenly. LA only grew by 2%, LA City by 2.5%, I think, and LA County by 2%, something like that. Other parts of the state grew by 7 or 9%. And so the unequal growth within the state creates a different issue. Now, in LA, as an example, I remember right before the census data came out, we were looking at estimated data. And it was like, oh my God, like collectively in these LA area congressional districts, it's estimated that we would lose 450,000 people. And I was speaking with somebody kind of on the big national redistricting stage, and I said, look, the census data is coming out next week. Estimates have it at 450,000 people short. If that gets to 550,000 people, then we're screwed. One of the LA Democratic members is going to lose a seat. And when the data came out, it was at 660,000 people short. So LA's growth relative to the rest of the state was probably a bigger headache than the actual losing of a congressional district. It meant that you were going to have that seat kind of implode in LA, and then you have also in LA the challenge of making sure that you're still drawing the same number of majority-minority districts and Voting Rights Act concerns and all of that. So the population in California not growing as fast as the rest of the country was definitely an issue, and an issue in other states. When we did the redistricting in the state of New York, you knew that a district was going to be lost in the state, and because of the way population was growing in that state, New York City was growing a lot more than the northern part of the state. And so we knew that basically New York City would be kept whole in terms of its number of congressional districts, and the lost congressional district would come out of the northern portion of the state. In California, it was kind of the opposite. The core Democratic area was the area that was losing faster than the rest of the state, and so then that was going to...
Something you kind of mentioned is this majority-minority.
Yeah.
What are the kind of some of the things that these members have to do that are either in law or in statute, where they have to, they can't just draw perfect boxes all across the state, like, majority, minority. What are some of the other things that they have to do and take into consideration?
Yeah, so the first criteria is that districts need to be equal population. And in a congressional plan, it actually has to be perfectly equal, which means that every district needs to be 760,066
Wow.
residents. And they give themselves a one person plus or minus on that. And so that is number one criteria. Number two criteria is that they follow the Voting Rights Act. And we talk about majority-minority districts. A majority-minority district it's a calculation of the Voting Rights Act. Since it's a Voting Rights Act issue, we look at people who would be eligible to vote and the racial composition of potential eligible voters. So it's looking at these districts and saying, hey, and there's these tests. Can we in this area draw a district where 50% of the population or more would be Latino, Asian, African American? And if that first answer is yes, then you have a majority-minority district. under the Section 2 of the Federal Voting Rights Act, you might be required to draw that majority-minority district if that area has racially polarized voting, which means that that community votes as a block, like Latinos are all voting largely for the same candidates, same issues, and there's a counter population, generally the white population, that is voting against their issues. So what you end up having is a situation where the Voting Rights Act is coming in and saying, look, you have the ability to create an opportunity for this community to elect a candidate that they want. If you draw that district in a way where they're only 38% of the district, you're ensuring that they're never going to elect the candidates that they want. If you get them to 50 or 51 or 55% or whatever, then they will have the ability to elect a candidate they want. And so the law requires the state in those cases to draw districts that are majority-minority. And in doing so, since that's the second criteria, they can kind of pass on a lot of the later criteria. So later criteria include the districts need to be compact, that they don't split cities and counties, that they have to still be contiguous, but they can kind of violate some of the later criteria because they're dealing with a higher rank criteria. So you have districts now that take like crazy little hooks and long weird shapes and that kind of stuff, but to justify that Section 2 requirement of the Voting Rights Act. So that is a key criteria and one of the things that really does kind of lock in the state. When we would do analysis of the state redistricting before the lines were even drawn, we'd be able to say like, look, here's the state.
Mm-hmm.
These blobs here are going to form 2 Central Valley congressional districts and 7 Los Angeles congressional districts and 1 in San Diego and 3 in the Inland Empire, and these are the fixed objects in the plan. The commission's going to have to draw these. Now, once you've drawn those, how can you draw the rest? What are the possibilities of drawing the rest? But they were really kind of fixed elements in the plan. There were areas where they were going to have to do it.
Right.
After that, then you start to look at those other requirements like communities of interest, making sure that an area isn't divided if it has like one strong community of interest, and then cities and counties and so on. The communities of interest thing is interesting. It did at some point kind of become the boogeyman for some people who were against the commission work. They'd be like, what's this community of interest thing? But the idea of a community of interest is, let's say you have an area of renters in a downtown community. And one person says, hey, there's this area of renters, let's draw them into like 5 different city council districts. Now all the city council members have to care about the renters. In reality, all the city council districts are 8% renter, and none of them care about the renters,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because their political base is in the suburbs or whatever. If instead you said, okay, we've got this downtown area of renters, let's draw them so that they can be in one district, now you're ensuring that that community of renters will have the ability to elect a candidate that they choose, and you'll be ensuring that their voice will be stronger in who gets elected, and whoever gets elected is going to be more responsive to their issues. And the law has tended towards that version of how lines should be drawn, and the state law says that when you identify a community of interest, you need to draw them within one district to maximize their voting and representative power. And so the state law and state and local redistricting really bends towards that. So like when I'm drawing districts in Santa Barbara, you have Isla Vista with the student population. You shouldn't be drawing that into 5 districts. You should be strengthening its percentage of 1 district. When you're drawing districts in the San Gabriel Valley, you should be thinking about those hillside communities and how they have different issues. They've got bears coming rummaging through their trash cans that the urban areas don't have. And there's actually, if you look on Twitter, there's a whole bears community of interest joke on Twitter where even one of the commissioners posted a picture of a bear in her driveway.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea of that interface between urban and mountain areas was a community of interest. And the idea is let's draw districts where all that area that has that issue can be in one district so that whoever gets elected there has to really care about that issue.
Right.
Rather than creating districts that where 9 different districts take in a tiny little bit of it and nobody's going to care about that issue.
That's interesting. So I assume as part of what you do, you did like a draft map before this all started. I guess how accurate was your draft map to the final
Don't
version?
ask me that. I mean, of course, it was perfect. Oh, there were a lot of things. So we actually, a little under the hood, we drew tens of thousands of draft maps. There's a process that you can use. We have programmers that are working on this, and we did this around the country. We would take a state like California, say Congress, or it could be the legislature or anything. We would oftentimes fix those areas that we know are voting rights act areas and say, okay, these are off, these are fixed. We're not going to be redrawing these areas. We're going to presume there's 5 districts in this area. They're all going to be Latino majority, minority, or whatever. We would create a program that would draw districts, one after the other, after the other, after the other,
Right.
thousands and thousands of plans. And then you treat this database you've now built of 10,000 redistricting plans, you treat that almost like you would a poll. You say to the computer program, how many incumbents stayed in their seats when this plan was drawn? How many times was a district drawn that put Lancaster with Palmdale? How many times was a district drawn that put Santa Clarita with Simi Valley? How many times did a district get drawn that took in the coast along Orange County? How many times? And you're basically asking this database, what are the probable events from the redistricting?
Right.
And it helps inform at like this kind of meta level of like what's really in play. And also you could fix things. So you could say, okay, program, did an awesome job, love all your 1,000 plans, but now I don't want you crossing the San Luis Obispo border. No districts can cross the San Luis Obispo border. Go, draw 10,000 more. And then you ask it, then what happens?
Right.
So you can do all this cool stuff with ensembles where you would say, okay, plan, when you're drawing the Asian seat in the San Gabriel Valley, I want you to draw it with one part of the Asian San Gabriel district and then create a little tether and go out to the Asian part of Diamond Bar. And I want you to draw the congressional plans. And now in this other one, don't do that. And the one where it split it, like we look at all the congressional districts and we'd see, aha, Newsom would have won 45 of these districts. We go back to the other one and go, oh my God, in this plan, Newsom would have only won 43% of the districts. We changed one thing structurally in the whole map and let the
That's
program run
interesting.
and tell us what the impact of that was. And it's all probabilistic. So it doesn't mean that every time you didn't cross the San Luis Obispo border, you'd get X number of seats that were good for Democrats or Republicans. But what it meant was that when you fix this one line, your odds were that you'd have better outcomes in this or that. So we had this kind of like mass line drawing programming, like analysis and probability scoring of different outcomes in one camp, and then we also did like draw lines. There are parts of the state where I pegged it, like literally drew exactly what the commission ended up drawing. There were other parts of the lines where I'm still kind of flabbergasted that they drew it the way they did.
Like the San Jose one, yeah.
Like the San Jose one, or this other one that objectively maybe it's a good district, but there's this new district that goes like Richmond across to Vallejo and then into Fairfield. And it used to be that the district from Napa would take in Vallejo, and then you'd have another district along the 80 that would be like the Yolo Solano district, right? You'd have these like two districts kind of next to each other. And now you've got this weird finger coming up from Contra Costa County into Fairfield. I never expected that. And it created a district that is 19.1% black citizen voting age population, the same as the Oakland-Berkeley district, 19.1% CVAP black. So literally, they created another kind of black influence district in Contra Costa into Solano County. I never called that. When I saw that, I was like, what?
Right.
But other districts, like, yeah, I could show you my original plans that I would draw, and basically most of the same.
It was funny just kind of seeing the discourse. There was a lot of, I guess, consternation about the lack of transparency, the, ability to comment, because everything was all on Zoom, this and that. And, it seemed like kind of at the end, everyone just started kind of submitting draft maps to them or kind of ideas to them. And it looks like a lot of those were adopted. Can you kind of talk about, I guess, that process there at the end where it seemed like everything kind of just came together and they kind of had their decision and kind of talk about like the transparency and stuff like that, and how it is a fair and open process?
Yeah, I mean, so first off, Yeah, we'd hear people calling and complaining about public comment, and sometimes it would drive me absolutely nuts. Like, we'd have seen a plan come out, and like it really harms X community, right? Like really, really bad plan. And then we call this organization and be like, oh my God, you need to go make sure you're doing something. Like, oh, we're gonna do something. And they'd call in, and you'd hear them start the call like, I'm so-and-so from this group. And we really want to have more than 5 minutes to comment on public plans, and we want to have you be a more open, transparent, and whatever, and such, and all this process stuff, and then like never complain about the lines that they drew. And I'd be like, oh my God, I'm going to kill you people. But there was a lot of noise about like how much public process they were having. They had so much public process. They had so much transparency. Everything was being done out in the open. The only time that kind of discussions about lines were happening outside of those open meetings was when one of two things was happening. One, it was like a legal Voting Rights Act concern. And so then they were talking about a Voting Rights Act concern. They don't want to necessarily have all of that discussion in public because it just becomes part of a lawsuit. So that's legitimate. The other is they said, hey, I want to draw a plan that does this, this, and this, and this. And the commissioner would be like, I don't think we want to spend 2 hours doing that. Why don't you go work with a line drawer and come back and present to us what you drew? Still super transparent.
Right.
Like you're still like articulating, I'm going to draw a district that does this and this and this and this, and then you come back the next day and you show them what you did with a line drawer and present it. Nothing not transparent about that. So crazy open transparent process, best in the country, more public comments, more engagement, more live line drawing than ever's been seen on planet Earth. And so to call it anything but like open transparent is ridiculous. There was this kind of weird cycle where there was a ton of public engagement and calling in prior to the data being released, right? And so a lot of the calls that were coming in were like people largely complaining about things from the old lines, or like having these political plays, like you need to put Simi Valley with Moore Park, or you need to put Simi Valley with Santa Clarita, or you need to not put Santa Clarita with Lancaster, or whatever, all this stuff, because they were like looking at their current districts and going, oh my God, I don't want this and I want this, and having like their staffers and people like that call in. It was just all political BS. Then the data comes out, but we don't have lines yet. In that period, then there's like this highly informed group that like goes like, oh God, like LA, we thought it was going to lose 450,000 people relative to the rest of the state. Now it's lost 660,000 people. How are we going to now change our argument about what we want drawn? So there was a bunch of public comment around that. Once lines came out, then it was a different kind of public engagement. And at the very end, it was almost like people are just throwing anything against the wall and see what sticks.
Right.
And you did have some commissioners who were literally like reading from the Black Redistricting Hub's letter, saying like, we want to put this community and this community and this community and this community together. Can we draw that? And so those of us watching outside were like, oh, okay, they're going to actually respond to something like that. So then like you start to get that kind of organizing done. It was very fluid. You kind of have to be on your feet the whole time. When they finally finished and I entered January and I realized how much less stress I had in my day, it's amazing. Like everything from the morning I got up until the dead of night, it was always like, what's happening to the commission, who said what commissioner did what, you know, it was just...
It's the worst time of the year, too. You got, like, holidays and Christmas and end of the year.
Jody, thank you so much. My wife knew this was coming. She knew for years it was coming. I told her, as the deadlines were changing, that it was going to just ruin Thanksgiving. There was a point where she was just going to go to Mexico for all Thanksgiving and just, like, leave me at home alone. They did end up going on some time off, but... yeah, I mean, Thanksgiving dinner, I was basically like working on redistricting and like showed up for dinner and then went back to redistricting.
That's crazy. So kind of earlier we talked about like the congressional seat. We lost one and kind of we all expected this like musical chair, kind of somebody's going to lose here. Was there any like clear like this congressman is no longer going to be here anymore?
So this is the irony is Alan Lowenthal's the seat that got disappeared, the Long Beach seat. He was like a standout, probably the only member of Congress. He actually wrote a ballot argument for Prop 11. He was one of the key supporters of the ballot measure, and he's the member of Congress that loses. Yeah, so that was pretty amazing. The other thing that's amazing about it is his seat got lost by getting drawn into the Lucille Roybal Allard district, which for political watchers was like, oh God, poor Robert Garcia is getting screwed because he was supposed to succeed Alan Lowenthal
Right.
we all expected. But Alan Lowenthal's seat gets disappeared. So what happens? Roy Ball Allard retires too, and now Robert Garcia is running for this seat where, and I have emailed folks nationally, like, have you ever, like, political people wait around their whole careers for somebody to retire or for a congressional seat
Right.
to open up. Have you ever seen somebody get given a congressional seat because 2 incumbents retire? Like, it
That's
took
lucky.
2 incumbents to
Wow.
retire for Robert Garcia to have this shot. And he's, huge front runner there for that district.
Yeah. So I guess turning to like the politics of this now, as we're seeing all this kind of change, like, how many like clear red seats are there? How many clear blue seats are there? And did they create more purple seats? Are we going to see more competition here in the coming years and, seeing who is elected?
Yeah, so in the last 30 days, I've been trying to spend more time on my bike than think about congressional districts, but I think I still remember these numbers. The districts that came out really were probably pretty good for Democrats. There are 2 districts in particular that Republicans basically had flipped into Democratic seats. And that would be the Valadeo district in the Central Valley. That is, that it's a majority-minority district that comes down into Bakersfield and goes north from there, not the McCarthy district. And then the Mike Garcia seat in that Santa Clarita one, the one I was talking about where like people are calling in and saying
Right.
somebody should be in and out.
Right.
So the Republicans that organized that stuff, they lost. And that district is Democratic. So those should be 2 Democratic pickup opportunities. Those should happen in 2022, but if Republicans held on to them, they should happen in 2024. But those districts are kind of off the list of Republican seats, basically, from the metrics. We could talk forever about whether or not the metrics are good. There's also the Michelle Steele seat, which is this Little Saigon seat that goes up into Fullerton, and it is one that I literally drew the exact district in my prep. And it was a new idea for a district, but it was creating more of an Asian opportunity district. And that district is on paper Democratic, but it'll be harder for Democrats to win that because they don't have like a great bench there. And so they're going to be, they don't have like a sitting assembly member who can run for that. They don't have a sitting state senator who's going to run for that. So it's going to be a little more challenging. Also, the late census data, I call the late census data incumbent protection. Like, that's not why they did this
Right.
census late, but the late census data meant you had later redistricting, which means it's like, voila, you've got your lines, and the person who's the incumbent has their campaign team, their fundraising, their organization, their endorsements, their whatever, and they're ready to go. And some challenger, like, they might have the best district in the world, but they don't even have a campaign chair, they don't have a fundraiser, they don't have endorsements, they don't have whatever. And now all of a sudden you have 60 days before the filing deadline, and you're like
Right.
kind of screwed. So the Michelle Steele seat is one that's Democratic. So that's basically, I'd say, on paper, Republicans lost 2.5 seats. Democrats lost 1 seat because they lost the Lowenthal seat. So net gain for Democrats, I think, in the plan overall, which from all those ensembles wasn't really supposed to happen. Democrats were supposed to lose 1.
Interesting. So, like, you work in a lot of states. You see kind of what goes on nationally. I guess, is our model, the best, in the nation?
Everything in
or
California is the best. We're the best at everything.
best weather?
Best at everything. I think the California process is the best process because it allows for a commission that has shown in these last 2 iterations to be high quality, above reproach in terms of their kind of partisanship and that makeup. The process, one of the things that some people might say they don't like about the commission process is that we don't have like a strict competitiveness criteria. In other states, you're supposed to look at like, is the number of seats that Democrats and Republicans going to win proportional to their share of the votes in statewide elections? We don't have that standard. We have like a partisan blindfold where they're not supposed to know or care about where the partisans are,
Right.
and just draw districts based on the rank criteria. I like that process. I like the fact that our commission is the final say and they implement the lines, as opposed to a commission that's kind of like a suggestion and it goes to the legislature and then they get to haggle over it. So this true independent commission process, I think, is definitely the best. Michigan did one this year that was basically the same process, a little different. I am a little bit more skeptical of the outcome of Michigan because they had some problems in drawing of the black districts, VRA issues that I just didn't think were right. So, but then there's other states that have different versions of this. But that California model, I think, is the best. I would love for it to be the national model. There is a national bill that would require states to have commissions. It would also have that competitiveness criteria language in it. I wish that it didn't, but having a commission structure nationally would be much, much, much better than these political footballs, you know?
That's kind of interesting because, yeah, originally you think, oh, yeah, competitive, that'd be good, right? But if it doesn't really represent the, you know, the locale or the people, then what does it matter?
It's kind of like one of those things where when you have, it's really, really harder than people would think. You need districts to all be whole pieces, equal size, not violate the Voting Rights Act. And then as you start to tack on more criteria, it gets harder and harder to draw like perfect districts. And if you say like districts have to be competitive, that's great in a sense, but you are going to end up subjugating the other criteria. So if you were to say the California map, like California map isn't quote unquote competitive, it's not proportional. The California map, California elects Republicans, or California voters vote on the Republican side of the ticket between 35 and 38% of the time, roughly, in the last couple of statewide elections for, you know, Congress and governor and president and that kind of stuff. So Republicans should have 35 to 38% of the districts. Based on the way the lines are drawn now, they have like, depending on which house you're looking at and what metrics you're using, they have anywhere from 12 to 20% of the districts. So we would have to take our map and then now adjust it to create more competitiveness. And how would you do that? Like, you would take Democratic-leaning Republican districts, or Democratic-leaning districts, and like try to shove more suburban white voters in them. You know, like there'd be a lot of things you'd have to do to really distort this map to make it be a 35% of Republicans getting elected. And in fact, it might be like look like a Republican gerrymander to do it. So competitiveness, just adding that additional criteria, it's going to end up subjugating the other criteria, and it's just, in my view, more harmful than good. Yeah.
So, you know, we've noted that you've been doing a lot of bike riding the past 30 days because this has been over. What kind of work does your company do, and what are you going to be doing, you know, the next 8 years as you prepare for this next commission?
You can just insert that GIF of you know, on The Simpsons. Who's that guy who just does this?
Yeah. Mr. Ned Flanders.
Ned Flanders. Yeah. So I going to be going back to Political Data April 1st. Political Data is the leading data vendor for political campaigns, mail files, walk sheets, data, digital, all that stuff. And I'll just be going back to just doing that digital, or that data work. And probably in 2028, 2029, I'll start rebuilding Redistricting Partners again. We got up to having a 20-person staff. Right now, we're kind of like, people are going off and getting campaign jobs and leaving us, and it sucks. We're losing awesome people that have done incredible work, but it's part of the life cycle for redistricting. You know, it's like that corpse flower that blooms only once every decade, and make the most of it while it's here. And then there will be some stuff, I know that, you know, I'll be doing some expert witness stuff for a couple redistricting cases, I'm sure. There might be an odd redistricting here and there, or a court mandated redistricting or something like that I'll get involved in, but it's just going to be on the side, and I'll go back to PDI.
So like during like the 2020 presidential election, we all kind of fell in love with Steve Kornacki. Him kind of going through the maps and showing, you know, everything. Is that kind of what Political Data has? You guys like know each district and the makeup and like?
Yeah, somewhat, but what we're actually doing is selling hard products. So there's a lot of soft products in politics. So like the Cook Political Report, or what the Target Book does, and all this kind of analysis, I kind of consider that a soft product. You see it, you buy it, you use it, but it doesn't actually like win you the campaign. It just is kind of like the soft goods industry in politics. the hard goods industry in politics is the mailers and the phone calls and the precinct walking and the digital ads and the data that goes behind that and the actual spending on voter contact and all that. So that's what PDI does. I know that like my friends will be like, oh, you should go do that Steve Kornacki thing and like talk about the districts and stuff like that. And I can do that if I had to. But it's, to me, this is going to sound super stupid and nerdy. I love cutting polling samples. I love like getting in the data, and it's almost like people know what a poll is, and a very select few of your listeners will have actually like been in a meeting with a pollster who's presenting a poll. Some of your listeners will have been in a focus group and been able to watch a focus group and they see this stuff. But days before that happens, that polling firm is contacting these random assigned voters. Days before that happens, they're like setting up their phone banks and doing all these mechanical pieces of polling. And days before that happens, they're on the phone with me saying like, okay, we have to do this poll. We need 600 respondents. They need to be representative of this community, of this people that are going to vote in this election. We need to have another 15% of them be Vietnamese speakers. We need to have the whole sample be representative based on partisanship and turnout and all this. And who's doing that piece of like in the mind, like actually building this database? That's me. And I love that stuff. Like I love that nerdy, like it's like I do it and I send it off and like I don't even know what ends up happening with it generally. And then sometimes I'll like be talking to someone, they'll be like in a focus group and they'll tell me like what happened in a focus group, or Jody will show me a poll and I'm like, I remember cutting this polling sample. I know like more about that poll than
if you're a candidate and you're looking, hey, I want to reach out to every Democrat in my district. Is that something your company would have? You would have these houses, these addresses. Out of doing that.
I'd say don't do that. Don't talk to every candidate. Don't talk to every Democrat. Talk to the Democrats who are likely to vote. And if there is a group of Democrats that's unlikely to vote, you want them to vote, put them into like a field program. If they're a community that's definitely likely to vote, let's work on building you a mail or digital universe for them.
Right.
And oh, by the way, you want to talk to every Democrat, but remember, more and more Latinos and young people are registering independent. They might be actually Democratic leaning. So here's another data set of people you need to go to, which are the independents. And we've devised this based on, this is an independent who like in 2016 pulled a Democratic ballot so they can vote for Bernie. So they need to go into your mailing list too. But they missed the last election, so let's put them in your field program turnout universe. Once they say they're going to vote, then put them in your likely voter universe. Like, how do you build this up? And oh, by the way, when you do that, don't just tell me you want the Democrats. Let's split up these universes based on these are the people that always vote early and these are the people that always vote late. And oh, you are doing a subset of this in Spanish language, right? So let's separate out the people who get Spanish language ballots or who were born in Mexico, and let's put that into a different data set. And let's build up this data set that allows you to be more effective than just reaching out to Democrats. And then when we're done, not only do you have your phone list, your mail list, your precinct walk universe, your pollster has the polling file that they need. You're able to like time it so that your mailer drops on Thursday, but the digital ads start on like the Tuesday before and run till the Tuesday after the date that mailer drops. Like, yeah, people come to me and say, I need this. And part of my job is in the way that I work with consultants, mostly with consultants, but very unlikely that I'm working directly with the candidate themselves, working with consultants, is like building them the tools so that they can like easily grab what they need and get it off to the mail house or get it to the digital firm or get those walks done, or when the walks are done, putting it back in the database so that they can take everybody who said no and take them out of their mail file universe. It's really fluid and there's a lot of moving pieces, and that's the part of what we do at PDI, and what I love doing is that kind of data end.
It's kind of like, analytics is taking everything by storm. I guess what percentage of candidates you think that are running today are actually using these analytics?
Or using it properly. One of the funny things is I used to just scream when people would call up and they'd be like, oh, I want to do what Obama did. Because Obama did this cool stuff. Did you hear what Obama did? Or so-and-so was like, I talked to this guy and he was on the Obama campaign. I want to do what Obama did. This is what Obama did. They had field walkers, and when somebody said they were supporting Obama, they'd send that person's record and put them in the fundraising database. And when somebody said they weren't going to vote for Obama, they'd send that data to the mail house and they'd remove those people from the mailing database. Wow. They did basic things good to connect databases. That was one of the key things they did. They also did modeling and stuff like that, but like one of the challenges that we have is that some candidates aren't using kind of basic, good, clean data, proper data, and really basic analytics. Like, so-and-so's an independent that pulled the Democratic ballot, is consider them a Democrat. Others go the opposite extreme. They're like, I'm running in a school district race, and I want to do modeling of all these voters and voter behavior, and I want to do targeting based on this modeling and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, okay, what's that going to cost you? Well, like $50,000. Like for $50,000, you can get 4 more mailers. Just send out 4 goddamn more mailers. It's more effective than whatever you're going to learn from your modeling.
Exactly.
Like people use modeling sometimes like they think it's going to win them an election. Modeling's job is to make your expenditures more efficient. It's marginal gains. And if you have a great model, you could probably make all your mail and phone and targeting universes maybe like 2 to 5% more efficient. But that also means that the sum of all those 2 to 5% inefficiencies has to be more than the cost of the goddamn mailing, modeling, right? If you're doing modeling and you're targeting the best universes in the world, but you actually could just be better appropriating those dollars, then it's just a waste of time.
That's fascinating.
Like people say, I'm going to spend $50,000 on modeling. I'm like, okay, well, are you sure you don't want to spend $50,000 like getting people to walk to people's doors and getting them to return their ballots instead?
Right.
Like I'm a nerd. I love math. I love modeling. I love modeling, but I am its biggest critic because I think it's so misused.
Right. That's funny, put it in perspective. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. You know, you could dig into that for hours and social media and all that stuff. That's a new, fascinating world.
Yeah.
But if listeners want to, look into some of the stuff you're doing in your company, where can they find some more information?
They can follow Political Data and Paul Mitchell, two different Twitter accounts, and they could also just go on a bike ride with me and talk their ear off.
Sounds good. Well, we'll see you on the bike trails, and thank you so much for stopping by and giving us some info on redistricting. It's been fascinating. Thanks, Paul.
Great talking to you.
All right.